What's the worst thing you've witnessed someone do and never told anyone about it? Story 1. At 6 a.m. on a cold summer morning in Sweden, I was heading home from a club. Suddenly, I saw a girl being kicked out of a slowly moving car by someone. At the time, I was about 500 meters away from her. When I got closer, she quickly picked up her bedroll and a small bag. She stood up and sat down on the stairs of a nearby house. I was already walking on the same side of the street as her. As I approached, she looked away, curled into herself, and tried not to be noticed. To be honest, at first I thought she might be some kind of addict. But as I got closer, I noticed she was dressed properly and seemed to be in some kind of trouble. So I asked her in Swedish if everything was okay. She looked at me with a huge black eye and said in Spanish, "No hablo." I don't speak much Spanish either, but I could tell she was a little afraid of me. I suppose it didn't help that I looked like a big, intimidating guy. I asked what had happened to her. She understood a bit of English mixed with Spanish. Finally, those one-year Spanish lessons paid off. At first, she didn't want to tell me anything and just wanted to be left alone. But I was persistent and a little drunk, and I'm glad I was. Eventually, I learned that her Spanish husband had moved to Sweden a few years ago and brought her along. He had been abusing her for years, keeping her locked up in an apartment near where she had been dropped off. She was rarely allowed outside. She was 45 years old, had no friends here, and no place to stay. Fortunately, she had dual citizenship in both Spain and Sweden. When I asked if she had any friends or family in Spain, she said, "Mom, Barcelona." I asked if she wanted me to contact a women's shelter for her. Thank you, iPhone and Google Translate. She started crying and said she wanted to go back to Spain. She showed me the cash she had saved up for that purpose. I handed her my phone and let her call her mom. From their conversation, I could tell they hadn't spoken in quite some time. While she was on the phone, I went online on my other phone. I carry two for work, took out my credit card and asked for her passport and name, booked her a ticket to Barcelona on the next available flight, arranged for a taxi to the airport. I followed her into the taxi and told her she was going to Spain. She looked relieved, even a little happy. The entire time she insisted on paying me back, but I told her it was better for her to save the money for when she reached her mom. I gave her my number and email in case she needed help along the way. A few days later, she emailed me a picture of herself with her mom and family. Story 2. When I was 15, I'm 22 now, my mom used to take my sister and me on cruises every year as Christmas gifts. For those who have never been on a cruise, you typically stop at different locations every day or so, where you can explore or participate in tourist activities organized by the cruise line. One year, we stopped in St. Martin and took a catamaran tour with other cruisers. During the tour, we stopped at a beach. The only way to get from the boat to the shore was to swim about 20 feet. Nothing too far. Most of the passengers were relaxing on the beach, while I stayed on the boat enjoying my punch. Suddenly, I heard a child screaming. I stood up, looked over the side of the boat, and saw a boy, maybe 7 years old, struggling to swim. He was a little behind the boat, about 90 feet from the shore, screaming for his mom to help. It seemed he had gotten salt water in his eyes and, being a weak swimmer, had started panicking. His head kept bobbing in and out of the water as he desperately tried to stay afloat. Without thinking, I dropped my punch, dove into the water and swam to him. The jump from the top of the boat was higher than anything I'd ever done before. I grabbed him under his arms and held his head above the water as I swam him back to shore. Once we were on the beach, I carried him while searching for his mom. When I finally found her, she hesitated before coming forward, almost as if debating whether to claim her son. She had been within direct sight of her drowning child the entire time. She saw me save him, along with everyone else, but didn't move or call for help. When I laid him on a towel and helped clean the salt out of his eyes, he hugged me and said, "Thank you." But his mom didn't say a word. No thank you, no acknowledgement of what had just happened. Instead, she looked angry at me. I asked, "Did you not see your son?" She replied, "I did." I then asked why she didn't do anything. She said, "Because I was on the beach." Keep in mind, the distance from the beach to where he was struggling was only about 90 feet. She didn't help clean his eyes or dry him off. I did it all while she stared at me with disdain. My parents saw the entire event unfold and told me they were proud of what I did. I kept an eye on the boy for the rest of the trip, especially after we got back on the cruise ship. I wanted to make sure his mom didn't try anything harmful. After the cruise, I never saw him again. I hope he's okay. Story 3. When I was living in the dorms during college, there was a girl a couple of doors down from me who was always very shy. Let's call her Ashley. I didn't know her well, but I was good friends with her roommate, Lisa. A couple of months into the year, Ashley started dating a guy from one of her classes. Lisa didn't like him from the start. She noticed subtle things Ashley would mention, like how he would put her down in front of his friends or make offhand comments about her weight. It was strange because Ashley wasn't even close to being overweight. He just seemed to treat her poorly. Lisa tried to warn Ashley, but Ashley dismissed it, repressing her feelings and thinking it was just normal behavior from a guy. One Saturday night, around 4 a.m., Lisa knocked on my door and asked me to come to her room. When I got there, Ashley was sobbing uncontrollably on her bed. Without going into all the details, she told us that while watching movies in his dorm earlier that night, he had assaulted her. We tried to convince her to report it, but she wouldn't. She refused to let us even talk to our RA, let alone go to the police. Over the following week, we did everything we could to support her. But this guy made things worse by spreading horrible rumors about her to his friends. He called her derogatory names like slut and whore and said she was easy. His friends started harassing her as she walked to and from class. By the end of the week, Ashley stopped going to class entirely and stayed in her room, lying in bed and avoiding everyone. That Friday afternoon, as I was returning from class, I passed Ashley in the hallway. I said hi, but she ignored me, staring straight ahead with a blank expression. She got into the elevator, pressed a button, and stared down at the floor. I thought it was odd, but considering what she was going through, I didn't dwell on it. About an hour later, I heard sirens from outside. Ashley had gone to the top floor, gained access to the roof through an unlocked door, someone had left it open so they could smoke, and jumped. To this day, I've never told anyone that I was the last person to see her alive. I carry the guilt of not doing something, anything, to save her. Story 4. When I was in high school, one of my friends hosted a party. Her parents had a strict rule that anyone drinking had to stay the night. Most of the guests were our group of friends, 7 guys and 12 girls, but there were also a few guys from her workplace whom none of us really knew. One of my friends passed out early in the evening, and my best friend, who was also her boyfriend, and I helped her to one of the bedrooms so she could sleep. We left her there, and about 30 minutes later, I went back to check on her. To my horror, I walked in on one of the random guys raping her. Without hesitation, I ran up to him, shoved him off her, and started punching him. I've trained as a boxer, so I hit him hard. I was so furious that I didn't stop until he passed out and started convulsing. I'd never seen a nose break like his did. Hearing the commotion, everyone else at the party came in and pulled me off him. My friend's pants were still down when her boyfriend walked in, and he immediately understood what had happened. He gave the guy a hard kick to the face before being pulled away. The guy was still convulsing on the floor, and his friends eventually took him to the hospital. He turned out to be okay, but he had the audacity to file a police report against me. When the police arrived at my house, my dad answered the door. They told him they needed to talk to me about an assault charge. We sat down with the officers, and I explained the entire story, including what I had witnessed and why I intervened. After hearing the situation, the police concluded that I was defending my helpless friend and decided not to press charges against me. Unfortunately, my friend chose not to press charges against him either. I later found out that he suffered a concussion, a shattered jaw, both cheekbones broken, several damaged teeth, and a badly injured eye. This was one of the worst things I've ever seen, and I've never felt such rage in my life. At that moment, I truly wanted to kill him. It's a side of myself I didn't know I could reach. Story 5. I was on a disaster relief mission with the American Red Cross in New York, Chalk, New Jersey for Hurricane Sandy relief. Our convoy of 10 Red Cross vehicles stopped at a quick-check gas station to refuel. There was a $40 maximum on gas purchases, and while most people accepted the rule, one very large and angry man didn't. The gas station attendant, a young guy, tried to explain the policy, but the customer wasn't having it. The police were stationed at every gas station due to tensions running high, but at this particular moment, they were inside the building. Before anyone could intervene, the man pulled out a pocket knife and stabbed the attendant in the chest, right in front of everyone. The entire line of people waiting for gas immediately swarmed the man, holding him down until the cops rushed out and arrested him. I'm sure some punches were thrown in the chaos. I'll never forget the amount of blood or the sound of the young attendant's screams. It was horrifying. Thankfully, as far as I know, the attendant made it to the hospital in time. I couldn't find anything about his death in the papers, which was a relief. That day, I lost some faith in humanity. Everyone was dealing with the same struggles, The $40 limit wasn't unique to him. Yet one selfish man thought he deserved more and nearly took a life over it. Story 6. This is something I've never shared, and I'm only posting it because it'll likely be buried. When I was a junior in high school, there was a senior who was the star quarterback and also the school bully. He spent more time skipping classes and wandering the hallways than in class, looking for kids to pick on. The teachers turned a blind eye because he's on the football team and we need to win. He'd routinely target freshmen, juniors, and unpopular kids. One day during class, I had to take a bathroom break. On my way back, I passed the stairs and saw him beating up another kid at the top of the steps. He hadn't noticed me, but the younger kid was cowering, arms over his head, trying to shield himself. Without thinking, I quietly walked up and body-checked the bully. He flew down the stairs, landing halfway before sliding the rest of the way to the bottom. He laid there, not moving. The freshman kid stared at me, completely stunned. I calmly looked at him and said, "He deserved it," before walking back to class as if nothing had happened. When the incident was investigated, the freshman claimed the bully had slipped and fallen down the stairs. When I was asked about it, I said I hadn't seen anything. I later found out the bully had broken his right forearm, wrist, and femur, as well as suffering a concussion. The injuries ended his football career. His father was furious and tried to sue the school, but the case fell apart because the bully insisted someone had pushed him with no evidence to support his claim. The school lost most of their remaining football games that season. Last I heard, the bully was unemployed, addicted to drugs, and still living with his parents. I don't regret what I did. Sometimes justice isn't neat, it's necessary. Story 7. About 12 to 13 years ago, I was at an oceanfront boardwalk with my son, who was about 2 years old, my sister, my sister-in-law, and my 4-year-old nephew. While they were browsing inside a shop, I waited outside with the kids. It was October and the weather was chilly, around 45 degrees. We were all bundled up in heavy coats, gloves, and scarves. The kids looked like the little boy from A Christmas Story. While standing there, I noticed a group of 3 children sitting nearby. One was in a stroller, barely a year old. Another was a little girl, maybe 2 or 3 years old, and the oldest was a boy around 5. They were wearing only t-shirts and shorts, had no coats or blankets, and were filthy. It broke my heart to see them sitting there, shivering in the cold. At first I hesitated. I wasn't sure what to do, so I waited. After about 20 minutes, I walked over and gave them some extra baby blankets I had and a couple of juice packs I hoped they weren't allergic to. I asked them where their mom or dad was, and the boy pointed to a set of stairs leading to a low-rent apartment above the shops. I figured their mother was either scoring drugs or doing something else shady because I couldn't imagine another reason to leave young children outside in the freezing cold. By the time my sister and sister-in-law came out of the shop, they saw me talking to the kids. When I told them what was happening, they rolled their eyes and walked away, annoyed that I was butting into someone else's business. That reaction made me so angry. So, I called the police. I don't know what happened after that, but I stayed until the officers arrived. I gave the kids another blanket I could spare and more juice. My sister and sister-in-law mocked me for getting involved. They treated me like I was being some sort of busybody and laughed at me for caring. I couldn't understand it. These were children. I know it's hard to step in and take action, and I can see why so many people don't. But I also know that doing nothing can haunt you for far longer. Story 8. Sorry. Last week I went to the post office to pick up a calendar, a gift from my grandmother that came with her newspaper's subscription. On my way back, I decided to stop by a store to grab a few beers for the evening. While I was there, I noticed a group of young guys harassing a poor-looking, middle-aged woman near the entrance. I didn't intervene. I thought to myself, this isn't the best neighborhood. Maybe this is just how things are here. After grabbing my beers, I went to the register. A few moments later, the same woman came up behind me with a pack of processed minced meat, the cheapest kind, and 2 loaves of bread. She began counting change from her wallet, and it was clear she was struggling to afford even those basic items. I don't know what came over me, but when the cashier scanned my beers, I pointed to her items and said, "Add these to my bill. I'll pay for them." I paid for everything, packed up my beers, and noticed the woman just standing there, staring at me. The cashier and the people around us were also looking at me like I had done something utterly bizarre. I said to the woman, "Aren't you going to take your stuff?" and then walked out. After that, I felt a wave of sadness wash over me. I decided to take the bus instead of walking home. But as I got on, I noticed all the high school kids with their iPods, smartphones, and trendy clothes. It made me even sadder. I couldn't hold back my tears, so I got off at the next stop and walked the rest of the way home, crying the entire time. I'm not entirely sure why I cried. It wasn't just about the woman and her struggles. It was about everything. The indifference of the people in the store, the judgment on their faces when I showed kindness, and the stark contrast between the woman's poverty and the privileged kids on the bus. It was a sadness I had never felt before, a deep ache for the unfairness of it all, for the way people have become immune to compassion, viewing it as something with a hidden agenda. I cried for the woman, for myself, and for the world we live in. Story 9. A few summers ago, I was sitting in a diner around 2 a.m. just having some coffee. At a nearby table, there was an elderly woman who looked completely emotionally drained. Sitting across from her was her grandson, who looked like bad news. After a few minutes, the woman started crying, and the grandson began yelling at her. He was screaming about how she always called him a drug addict and kept putting him in rehab. It was unbelievable to watch. When the shouting finally stopped, she composed herself just enough to say, "I love you more than I love life itself, sweetie." On that note, he got up, screamed, "Fuck you and die," punched her in the face and bolted out of the diner. I rushed over to her table, trying to calm her down. She was shaking and crying. I paid for their bill and walked her to her car. I insisted on calling the police, but she refused. She said she didn't want to deal with the shame of it all. Before she left, I gave her my phone number. From time to time, we would talk. I just wanted her to know that someone cared. Story 10. When I was in college, I wasn't very kind to my younger brother. He was a couple of years younger, and we didn't have much in common at the time. I didn't know he was going through a rough period in his life, and I was being especially mean to him one day. Out of nowhere, he came at me like he wanted to fight. Normally, I'd win our scuffles pretty easily, but this time, we ended up wrestling on the ground. He managed to get me in a chokehold. He won. I tapped his arm, which was always our signal that the fight was over, but this time, he didn't let go. He kept holding on and choked me out. Apparently, after I passed out, he panicked and started trying to resuscitate me. He says he tried everything he could remember from first aid classes and TV. Mouth to mouth, chest compressions, anything. I eventually started breathing again, obviously, and he broke down. He told me he was so angry at me for all the years I'd been a jerk to him that he just lost control. I never told anyone about what happened. Not my parents, not my friends. But things were pretty tense between us for a few years after that. Over time, though, we became much closer than we ever were before. Maybe it's because I fear him now. Kidding. But I've also become much more mindful of how I treat him and others. It's been about 10 years since that happened. While I've moved past it, he still struggles with the memory. Sometimes I try to joke about it. Whoa, don't kill me or anything, to show him that it's okay to laugh about it now. But every time he shuts down and won't talk to me for the rest of the day. I wish he could let it go. I hate that it still weighs on him so much. Story 11. When I was 16, I was walking to the public transport dock after seeing a film in the inner city. It was around midnight and the area wasn't the safest. The dock was under a bridge along the river, and I was heading down the stairs with my headphones in, minding my own business. As I descended, 4 men pushed past me, dragging another guy down with them. One of the men turned to me and threatened, "If you do anything other than walk away, I'll glass you in the face." Terrified, I did as he said and continued toward the dock. From a distance, I watched as the 4 men beat the guy mercilessly. They broke bottles over him, kicked him while he was on the ground, and stole his wallet before running off. The man was left lying motionless, covered in blood and surrounded by shards of broken glass. I didn't have the courage to go over and help him. I told myself that other people must have seen it too, and that someone else would step in or call for help. But the guilt stayed with me. I feel a lot of anger and regret about that night. Over the years, I've been threatened and harassed so many times in the city or on public transport, but I never seemed to do anything. That night was just another reminder of my fear, and it still haunts me. Story 12. During my freshman year of college, I was at a sketchy party house with some friends. There was a guy in a wheelchair who often came to parties. He had long hair and seemed pretty chill. Also at the party was a big stocky guy who had a reputation for being a bully. I'd seen him push people around before, and I didn't like him, but I'd never had a direct run-in with him. At some point, the guy in the wheelchair and the bully got into an argument. When the wheelchair guy called him bro, the bully snapped. He grabbed the guy by the neck and threw him out of his wheelchair and onto the floor. The entire party erupted into chaos. A massive brawl broke out as people started fighting the bully. The two girls I was with ran up to me, and I helped them push through the crowd to get out of the house. Cops had been called, and since most of us were underage, people were scattering like rats from a sinking ship. I sent the girls back to the dorms with a male friend while I stayed back, watching from the edge of the trail that led to campus. It was dark, and I hid in the bushes, waiting to see what would happen. After a few minutes, I heard sirens in the distance. Just as I was about to leave, the bully came sprinting down the trail, completely unaware that I was there. At the last second, I stepped out and threw the punch of a lifetime. A cheap shot, but a justified one. I knocked him out cold, cutting my hand on his teeth in the process. Later, I heard that he was arrested, though I don't know what charges he faced. I never saw him again after that night, and I can't say I'm sorry about it. Story 13. In high school, there was a girl at our lunch table. Let's call her Jay. She was a junior like the rest of us, but it was clear that something was different about her. Jay had special needs and was in special education classes. She often acted in ways that stood out, drawing us pictures in crayon, bringing a baby doll to school, and behaving in ways that seemed more childlike than typical for someone her age. One day, she came to the table, placed her pencil case between my friend and me, and told us very seriously to watch it closely, but do not touch. Then she went to get her lunch. A few moments later, the pencil case started moving. My friend gently opened it, and a large white rat poked its head out. Despite Jay's challenges, most people didn't show her any understanding or compassion, not even the teachers. They would punish her for things that were clearly beyond her control, constantly giving her in-school suspensions or detentions. At our lunch table, a few of us were kind to Jay. We were friends with her brother and also just decent people. But others at the table were cruel. They openly mocked her, teased her to her face, which she never seemed to understand, and treated her terribly. The worst incident happened one day when Jay left her backpack on her chair while she was in the lunch line. One of the meanest girls at our table grabbed the backpack, walked across the lunchroom, and hurled it as hard as she could, sending it flying about 100 feet. I was furious. I stormed across the lunchroom, retrieved Jay's backpack, and confronted the girl. It almost turned into a full-blown fight. I didn't care. I told her off, and after that, the mean half of our table decided to sit elsewhere. Jay didn't seem to understand what had happened or why, but I was glad to see those cruel people leave. Sometimes standing up for someone is the only way to show them they matter, even if they don't fully realize it. Story 14. This story still weighs on me because it was one of my first encounters with homelessness. I grew up in a small town of about 250 people where homelessness wasn't something I ever experienced. Years later, walking in downtown London, Ontario, I encountered it firsthand. I had just started a lucrative new career and was walking with two colleagues. We passed a young woman sitting on the sidewalk. She couldn't have been older than her early 20s. As we walked by, she looked up, caught my eye, and softly asked, "Spare change?" She was strikingly beautiful in a way. Long blonde hair and a kind face. It was clear she was struggling. In that fleeting moment, my mind wondered, why hadn't she resorted to selling her body, as so many in desperate situations are forced to do? Maybe she had chosen not to go down that path. But instead of stopping, I kept walking. My colleague quickly said sorry and continued his sentence, and the other followed suit. I had mere seconds to decide whether to stop, but I didn't. I kept walking. To this day, I vividly remember the look in her eyes, pleading and full of dependency on the mercy of others. I denied her that mercy. Since then, I've encountered countless homeless individuals. Sometimes I give money or buy food. Sometimes I just keep walking. I tell myself the problem is complex, that I can't help everyone, but that girl's face still haunts me. I hate that her face, and the faces of so many others, have become part of a nameless, faceless statistic. That moment reminds me of the coldness and indifference of our society. A society where we often convince ourselves to walk away instead of stopping to help. One day, I fear her eyes will condemn me, not just for my inaction, but for the collective callousness of our entire civilization. Story 15. In high school, I was a total nerd. I was the secretary of my high school robotics team and attended a school dominated by jocks. One day in study hall, Two jock girls sitting behind me started mocking a girl sitting in front of me who was overweight at the time. They called her fatty and even mooed at her. The girl in front of me began to cry, and the jock guys, noticing the commotion, egged them on. I had recently lost 30 pounds, so I could deeply empathize with the girl being bullied. What upset me even more was that our study hall teacher saw the entire thing and didn't say a word. I couldn't sit by and do nothing. I stood up, turned around and said, "I think you two should shut up and mind your own business." The whole group of jocks went silent, stunned. I awkwardly balled my fists, stood taller, and added, "Yes, that's more like it. Be quiet." Then I sat back down. I thought that was the end of it, but one of the jock girls tapped me on the shoulder and threatened to beat me up after school. After study hall, I told my nerd boyfriend, who of course was the president of the robotics team, what had happened. He and a few of the other robotics guys formed a human shield and walked me to my car after school for the rest of the week. That night, one of the jock guys messaged me on AIM. He told me how awesome it was that I had stood up to those girls and admitted it made him realize that he and his friends were jerks. He promised to make sure the girls wouldn't hurt me, and true to his word, he started sitting between me and the jock girls in study hall, a silent human shield of his own. After that day, those girls didn't bother me or the girl they had bullied. That same jock guy even nominated me for homecoming queen, and I almost won thanks to a nerd uprising. He's now a professional football player, and I can't help but think he caught some good karma that day. We never spoke again after that AIM conversation, but he always smiled at me in the hallways. Story 16. When I was younger, I played in a recreational soccer league. There was a kid on my team who was tiny, so small and fragile looking that he spent most of his time on the bench. Over the season, I learned more about him. His family had immigrated from Mexico a few years earlier, and his English wasn't great, which made him shy and made it hard for him to make friends. Eventually, he stopped coming to practices and games. Our coach explained that he was often sick and hospitalized, and that playing soccer was too physically demanding for him. 2 years later, we were both in junior high. He was still very small, and his English hadn't improved much, but he was brilliant at math. We ended up in the same advanced math class, which was impressive because I was a year older than him. Sadly, the football players at school started bullying him relentlessly. They teased him about his size and called him names like Taquito, Wetback, Chihuahua, and Little Bean. He came to school less and less frequently, and I assumed it was because he was sick again. But the truth was much worse. He had stopped eating. Tired of being bullied and sick, he decided to give up. He hid his struggles from his parents, and by the time they realized what was happening and took him to the hospital, it was too late. He passed away. The school held an assembly in his honor, but pretended he died because of his illness, avoiding any mention of the bullying. Fast forward 5 years to last week. I was filing my taxes for my part-time job when I noticed his picture on a woman's desk. It was his mom. She caught me staring and asked if I knew him. Before I could say anything, she smiled and said, "He would have turned 18 last month." She seemed at peace, but I wasn't. I still feel terrible for not speaking up back then. Last year, I watched those same football players get signed to big colleges, and I can't help but wonder if they remember what they did. I feel horrible for staying silent, for not standing up for him when he needed it most. Story 17. When I was about 10, my brother, who was 5 years older than me, and I didn't get along very well. The age difference played a big role, but at the time, all I wanted was to hang out with my big brother. This was the 90s, and both of my parents worked full-time. My mom usually got home around 5, and I'd get home from school around 4. My brother, being in high school, was always home before me. One day I came home and walked into the kitchen to find him standing there with a knife to his neck. I don't remember what I said. This was 16 years ago, but I talked him down. That wasn't the only time. I think it happened 2 or 3 times in total. I never told anyone. I should have, of course, but I was scared of losing my hero. I thought if I told someone, they'd take him away. Not long after that, he told our parents himself. It turned out he had schizophrenia. Back then, my brother looked like a model, athletic, handsome, and excelling in school. But the cocktail of medications he needed, combined with depression, changed his eating habits and took him away from sports. Today, he looks completely different, resembling Curly from the Three Stooges more than the big brother I once idolized. If you've never experienced schizophrenia firsthand, it's hard to understand. For my brother and many others like him, It's living with voices that constantly tell him he's worthless and stupid, sometimes in the voices of people he loves. If I could trade places with him, I'd do it in a heartbeat. My brother will probably never be truly independent, but I've accepted that. When our parents are gone, I'm looking forward to living with him again. For the past 15 years, I've been the little big brother, and I'm so grateful he put that knife down. Story 18. This isn't something I've kept a secret exactly, but reading about bullying reminded me of a moment I'm proud of. When I was a senior in high school, I was walking down the hallway when I noticed another senior guy walking in front of me. I was taller and heavier than him by a solid 4 to 5 inches and 20 to 30 pounds. I'd known him since 6th grade, so I recognized him immediately. In front of him was a freshman girl I also knew. She had Down syndrome, and I'd known her and her family for as long as I could remember. Without hesitation, this guy started mocking her. He did the retard sign, crossing his eyes, sticking out his tongue, and making hand gestures to mock her disability. It took me only a few seconds to realize what he was doing. Without thinking, I full-on punched him in the back of the head. The hallway was packed with at least 100 students, so technically, I didn't keep it a secret. The girl didn't seem to notice what was happening, but a lot of people saw the guy hit the ground. As he got up, several students told him how messed up his actions were. Looking back, I'm proud of myself for standing up for her. Sometimes you don't need to say anything to make a statement. Story 19. I was at the airport when I noticed a large family that appeared to be Middle Eastern. They spoke with an accent and had 2 young children with them, maybe around 3 and 7 years old. The kids were running around, playing noisily and unrestrained, which was starting to annoy the people around them. The parents didn't seem to notice or care as they continued chatting amongst themselves. Then out of nowhere, the father snapped. Maybe he felt the weight of the irritated stares from others, or perhaps his patience just wore thin, but his reaction was extreme and harsh. He grabbed the older boy by the arm, yanking him up roughly. It looked painful, and slapped him across the face. Then he dropped the boy into a seat, and the child wailed in pain and confusion. Meanwhile, the mother grabbed the younger boy, yanking him into a seat as well. While she wasn't as violent, it was still more forceful than anyone should be with a 3-year-old. I wanted to say something, but I didn't know what to do. Calling the police felt pointless. They would likely have boarded their flight by the time anyone arrived. I couldn't confront the entire family, which included at least a dozen members who clearly didn't see an issue with the parents' behavior. What really stuck with me was how sudden it all was. The kids had no warning that their behavior was wrong. One moment, their parents were ignoring them entirely, and the next, they were punished violently. That moment has stayed with me over the years. The oldest boy would likely be a teenager by now, and I can't help but wonder how he's doing. I hope he's okay. Story 20. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, I was playing outside at the apartment complex where we lived. A man approached me and asked if he could show me something. He promised that if I let him, he'd give me $1. I was a naive kid and didn't understand what he might mean. I remember asking him what he wanted to show me, genuinely curious, but he wouldn't tell me. That made me uneasy, so I told him I wasn't interested and didn't need any money. Despite that, he handed me the $1 anyway and walked away. At the time, I didn't fully grasp why, but I knew something was wrong. The $1 made me feel uneasy, and I didn't want to spend it. Instead, I put it on the top shelf of my closet, crumpled just as he'd given it to me. It stayed there for weeks, but every time I saw it, I felt creeped out. Eventually, I couldn't take it anymore. About a month later, I burned the $1. Years later, I realized the danger I'd been in. The man likely had sinister intentions. At the very least, he probably wanted to expose himself to me. The thought of what could have happened terrifies me to this day. I've never told anyone about this until now, over 20 years later. Story 21. I'm 19 now, studying chemistry in college, and my best friend Lexa has been in my life since we were 4 years old. She's beautiful, kind, and the girl I've always had a crush on. But she's also my best friend, and I've always just wanted her to be happy. A while back, she started dating a guy at college. I was jealous, but as long as she was happy, I kept my feelings to myself. One day, I decided to surprise her by visiting her dorm in Fairfield, Connecticut, about an hour's drive from my home in North Jersey. When I arrived, I saw her boyfriend leaving her dorm building. He looked flustered and was in a hurry, but we exchanged a quick hi as he passed me. When I reached her room, the door was wide open, even though it was winter and no one was around. Inside, I found her friend lying on the bed, unconscious, with a bump on her head. Lexa had a black eye and a bleeding lip. She looked shocked to see me and hadn't known I was coming. My first instinct was to get help. I ran to the RA, told them to call 911, and asked them to get up to Lexa's room with first aid. Then I told them I needed to grab something from my car. What I really did was go looking for her boyfriend. By sheer luck, I found him smoking a cigarette in the parking lot, a few cars away from mine. I grabbed a tire iron from the back of my car, walked over to him, and smiled as I asked, "You're Lexa's boyfriend, right?" Before he could respond, I sucker punched him in the gut and started hitting him with the tire iron. I couldn't stop. By the time I was done, he had missing teeth, a broken jaw, a disfigured arm, and a gash on the back of his head. I put the tire iron back in my car and returned to Lexa's room. The ambulance arrived, and both Lexa and her friend were taken to the hospital. I drove behind them, and thankfully, they both recovered after a few days. The cops found her boyfriend and took him to a different hospital. Back in New Jersey, Lexa stayed with her family, and her friend's dad came to pick her up. A few days later, I asked Lexa if she had been raped. Thankfully, she said no. A little while after that, I visited Lexa at her house. When I walked in, she had just learned about her ex-boyfriend's condition from her mother. She didn't say a word to me. She just walked over, kissed me on the cheek, and hugged me. It felt like that hug lasted an hour. We spent the rest of the night sitting together, watching Pulp Fiction, our favorite movie. Lexa dropped all charges against her ex as long as he promised to stay away from her. We've never told anyone what I did to him that night. Lexa is doing great now, enjoying life and her semester at college. And as for me, I don't regret what I did. I'd do it all over again if it meant keeping her safe. Story 22. One scorching afternoon, I was walking through a parking lot when I noticed a couple standing near a car. The woman was on the phone, visibly upset, while the man was walking away, swearing under his breath. Curious and concerned, I approached to check if everything was okay. That's when I saw it. A little dog lying on the front seat of the car. The dog was breathing heavily, its tiny body rising and falling quickly, but it wasn't moving much otherwise. It turned out the couple had come across the dog squealing in the car a few minutes earlier. The woman had called the police, who directed her to the Humane Society. She was now on the phone with them, and they promised to send someone within 45 minutes. But it was clear the dog didn't have that kind of time. The man returned with a tire iron in hand. He grabbed the phone from his wife and told the Humane Society exactly what he was about to do. Then, without hesitation, he smashed the car window, reached in, and pulled the dog out. His wife rushed the dog to their car, where the air conditioning was blasting, and gave it water. The man didn't stop there. He proceeded to smash out every single window in the car before telling us he was taking the dog to an emergency pet hospital. Then they drove off. About 2 hours later, we returned to the parking lot. The car was still there, but now the owners had returned. Playing dumb, we walked by and asked what had happened. The woman angrily explained that someone had smashed all their car windows. Then she added, almost as an afterthought, "Oh, and our dog is missing." I asked how long they had left their dog in the car because it had been so hot. She assured me they had just run into the store for a minute. I found it hard to believe, considering we had seen the couple break the windows after the dog had already been trapped for at least 30 minutes. The audacity of her lie still sticks with me. I hope that little dog got the care it needed and never ended up back in their neglectful hands. Story 23. When I was in year 6, around 11 years old, there was a boy in my class who was often bullied. Not by the students, but by our teacher. The boy wasn't particularly naughty, just a little cheeky at times, as kids often are. He struggled academically and never seemed to have the right supplies for school, like his PE kit or even his school diary signed by his parents. It was clear his home life wasn't great. For some reason, our teacher had it out for him. She would belittle him constantly, picking on him more than anyone else in the class. The worst incident I remember was when the boy explained he couldn't get his diary signed because his mom was busy at work. The teacher snapped, "Sounds like she's as stupid as you." My friend and I were deeply bothered by it. We would talk to each other about how unfair and cruel it was. But at that age, we believed adults were always right, especially teachers. We were both goody two-shoes, and it didn't occur to us that we could speak up or report her behavior. Even now, 15 years later, my friend and I still talk about how much we regret not saying anything. I wish we'd had the courage and awareness to stand up for him. It's a lesson I've carried into adulthood. No one should have to endure bullying, especially from someone in a position of power. Story 24. When I was in 6th grade, something happened during PE class that I've never been able to forget. I was being my usual slacker self and wanted to avoid participating in basketball or whatever we were doing that day, so I asked the teacher if I could go to the bathroom. Our school was old, and the locker room didn't have stalls, so if you needed privacy, you had to go down the hall to the restroom. The teacher gave me the okay, so I left the gym and headed toward the bathroom. As soon as I walked in, I immediately noticed something was wrong. There were two sets of feet visible under the partition of one of the stalls, facing away from the toilet. Pants were around ankles, and I could see shadows that looked like thrusting. I also heard a man's voice, though I can't remember what was being said. I froze. My mind raced, and I had no idea what to do. I quietly backed out of the restroom, my heart pounding, and returned to the gym. I stayed near the door, keeping an eye on who came out of the bathroom. A few minutes later, I saw them exit. It was one of the special needs kids from school, accompanied by an older man who looked like he could have been his father. My stomach churned, and I felt like I was going to throw up. The rest of the day was a blur. I couldn't eat lunch and just felt sick. I never told anyone about what I saw, and to this day, I don't know why I didn't speak up. It's something that still haunts me. Story 25. When I was 11, I witnessed my father beat a man unconscious and throw him through a glass window. We were walking downtown in my hometown when we came across a man in his 50s harassing a panhandler. The man was shoving and yelling at the homeless man, trying to pick a fight. My father didn't want to get involved, especially with me there, so we kept walking. As we passed, my dad muttered something under his breath about the scum of the earth. Unfortunately, the man heard him. He turned his attention away from the panhandler and started shouting at us. My dad ignored him, but the man wasn't letting it go. He followed us, swearing and hurling insults. My dad kept walking, but when the man caught up, he grabbed my dad by the collar. My father calmly batted his hands away and walked faster, clearly trying to avoid a confrontation. That's when the man turned his attention to me. He called me a shed little faggot because I had long hair for a boy. That was the breaking point for my dad. My father stopped, turned around, and hit the man with a single punch that knocked him off his feet. He didn't stop there. He pummeled the man for about 20 seconds, leaving him bloodied and dazed. Then, as if that weren't enough, my dad picked him up and threw him through the glass window of a nearby building. The building was under renovation, and the road construction nearby created a barrier that prevented most people from seeing what had happened. The few who did witness it had already seen the man harassing the homeless person and verbally abusing us. They turned a blind eye to what my father did. Afterward, my dad came over to me, looked me in the eye and said, "Let's not tell your mother about this. It's something I've never forgotten." It was both terrifying and oddly reassuring to see the lengths my dad would go to in order to protect me. But it also left me questioning the consequences of that day. Story 26. When I was 11, something happened that has haunted me ever since. I've never spoken about it to anyone, but it's time to finally share it, even anonymously. I was waiting at the bus station with my mom in our small, quiet town. It wasn't the kind of place where people worried about crime or trouble, so I wandered off for a little walk around the back of the station while we waited for our bus. While walking, I saw a skinny young girl walking down the street. She seemed normal, and I didn't think anything of it at first. Then out of nowhere, a black 4x4 pulled up beside her. Two men got out and forcibly grabbed her. She struggled and fought, but she couldn't escape. She didn't scream. She was silent, but you could see the desperation in her movements. They shoved her into the car and sped off. I froze. I was just a kid myself, and I didn't know what to do. Fear paralyzed me, and I stood there, unable to move or speak. By the time I thought about telling someone, they were already gone. For the next week, I couldn't shake what I had seen. My mom even noticed that I was acting odd, though I never told her why. Then one day at the local shop, I overheard the shopkeeper talking to a customer about a story in the paper, a tragic kidnapping. When I looked at the newspaper, my heart sank. It was an interview with the very girl I had seen being forced into the car. I almost fainted when I realized it. I didn't say anything. I was scared of the drama, of the consequences, of how my family might be dragged into it. I was just a kid, and I selfishly kept quiet. To this day, I don't know what happened to her. I don't know if she escaped or was released. I've tried to block it out, but it remains one of the biggest regrets of my life. I wish I had done something, anything. It's over now, but I'll carry that guilt forever. Story 27. When I was in 4th grade, I witnessed something that still affects me to this day. I watched my mom get beaten by her then boyfriend. It happened one day after she came home from work. He was angry about something. I don't even remember what. At first he got rough, pushing her around. She tried to get away, but he grabbed her and dragged her into the bathroom. I could hear her screaming. I ran to the bathroom door, crying and begging him to stop. I screamed for her, but he didn't care. After what felt like an eternity, he opened the door, looked at me, then went back to beating her with the door wide open. All I could do was stand there crying and pleading with him to stop. Eventually, he left the house. As soon as he was gone, I ran to lock the door behind him. When I returned to the bathroom, my mom was gone. She had snuck out the back door and run to the neighbor's house for safety. He was arrested later, and I didn't see him again until I was about 15 years old. Just looking at him brought back all the anger I had buried. In that moment, I understood what it felt like to want to kill someone. My mom, being the strong woman she is, told me that holding a grudge wasn't the answer. She said we have to let go of the past and hope for a brighter future. Out of respect for her, I never said anything to him. But if I ever saw him again now, I wouldn't hesitate to let him know exactly how I feel. I haven't shared this story with many people. Sometimes I even forget that I was one of those kids who witnessed domestic violence growing up. But it shaped me in ways I can't ignore. I think it's why I'm so guarded with men. I find it hard to trust them or let them in. The thought of my own children ever experiencing something like that terrifies me. It's a fear I carry with me, and one I hope I'll never have to face. Story 28. Back in 2010, I lived in a small, single-bedroom apartment in a gated complex near a bus stop. It was in a decent area on the outskirts of Los Angeles, but right on the border of a high-crime neighborhood. One evening, I was home after work, waiting for my girlfriend to come home so we could go out to dinner. Suddenly, there was loud, aggressive knocking at my door. I assumed it was my annoying neighbor coming to complain about something trivial again, so I opened the door without much thought. Instead, I was met by two men, both around my age and size, who immediately tried to shove the door open. One of them grabbed my shirt and wound up to punch me, but he was behind the other guy, so I instinctively grabbed the closer man's elbow and shoulder, then used a hip thrust kick to knock him back into his friend. Adrenaline hadn't even kicked in yet. I was strangely calm. I slammed the door shut, locked the deadbolt, and ran into my bedroom. That's when the panic set in. I could hear them kicking the door and yelling, "Yo, get this nigga!" Despite all of us being white, though one might have been Hispanic, I grabbed my handgun, a Springfield XD-40, from my nightstand, along with a loaded magazine of hollow point rounds. I chambered around and opened the door, shouting, "Get the F back! Get the F back!" My voice cracked from the effort, and it hurt my throat the next day. At first, they just stared at me, confused. I don't think they fully understood what was happening. The guy I had shoved earlier was still holding onto his friend's shirt like a lifeline. I racked the slide, ejecting an unfired round onto the ground. The sound of the gun cycling seemed to finally snap them out of it. They started retreating, but not as quickly as I would have expected. The guy I had shoved tripped on the stairs and stumbled a few steps, but didn't fall far. I shouted something incoherent about my girlfriend calling the cops. My words came out as a garbled mess, thanks to my adrenaline and dry mouth. For some reason, I even felt like I needed to take a That's how jacked up I was. They finally picked up their pace and still taunting and posturing as they left. I followed them to the security gate, where I saw a third guy, smaller and younger, probably a teenager, standing near a red Honda parked in a neighbor's spot. They all piled into the car, backed into a steel trash can by the bus stop, and sped off. Shaken, I backed away into the gate, unloaded my gun, and stuffed it into my pants. A minute later, my girlfriend arrived. I didn't tell her what had just happened. I helped her carry some bags upstairs, stashed the gun discreetly, and listened to her talk about something I can't even remember now. I never reported the incident to the police or even my landlady. I didn't want my girlfriend or her parents to find out, especially since they already disapproved of her living in what they thought was a rough neighborhood. To this day, I wonder why they knocked on my door specifically. It felt random, and I don't know if they had weapons on them or what they really intended. If my girlfriend had come home just a few minutes earlier and opened the door, the situation could have ended much worse. I've never told anyone about that night. Not my friends, not my ex-girlfriend, not the cops. I hope those guys learned a lesson, but I'll never know. Since then, I've kept many guns, but have also become a firm believer in responsible gun ownership and background checks. That night made me realize how quickly things can escalate and how important it is to stay prepared, but also just how terrifying it feels to have to use a weapon in self-defense. Story 29. When I was around 5 or 6 years old, I had an intense, almost irrational fear of loose dogs, no matter their size. For some reason, every dog seemed to sense this and would come running toward me, tail wagging, trying to change my mind about them. One morning, I was walking back from a breakfast restaurant with my dad when we came upon a house on the corner. A family was playing in their yard with a small white dog. Naturally, the dog noticed me and came running toward me, happy and full of energy. Terrified, I panicked, and my dad picked me up to keep me away from the dog. The dog's owners started calling it back, and my dad also told the dog to go home. The little dog wagged its tail at me, as if trying to convince me that it was friendly, but then obediently trotted back toward its family. Just as it reached the street, an 18-wheeler truck came speeding around the corner, far too fast for a residential neighborhood. The truck hit the dog, its small body tumbling under the wheels. The truck didn't stop, likely unaware of what had just happened. The family ran out to pick up the dog's lifeless body, and I burst into tears. It was the first time I had ever witnessed an animal die. One of the dog's owners, clearly in shock, came up to me and apologized. I don't remember the exact words, but it was something like, "My dog was a really friendly dog." Then they walked away, cradling the dog. That moment stayed with me for years. Whenever I drove past that house while I still lived in the state, I would feel a wave of sadness and guilt for their loss. Ironically, I'm a huge dog lover today, and eventually one enthusiastic, slobbery dog managed to tackle me out of my fear. Still, the memory of that little white dog and the family's grief remains etched in my mind. Story 30. In high school, I attended a sleepover that still haunts me to this day. A new friend of mine, Alexis, invited me to her birthday sleepover along with about 10 other girls. I didn't go to the same school as them, so everyone else there was a stranger to me. At first, everything seemed normal. They were friendly, and I felt included. Later in the evening, another girl, Ashley, mentioned that someone named Jamie was on her way. The group confided in me that they hated Jamie and had only invited her so they could mess with her. I didn't say anything, and to my shame, I went along with it. When Jamie arrived, she was ignored and excluded from conversations while Alexis's parents were still around. But once we moved to the house's casita for the night, things escalated. Ashley began by taking lotions and creams from Alexis's bathroom and pouring them into Jamie's sleeping bag. I don't remember my exact role, but I might have helped Ashley do this. Jamie silently picked up her sleeping bag, wiped it off, and climbed back inside. This enraged Ashley. With the help of a few other girls, she held Jamie down and poured more lotion into her sleeping bag, on her clothes, in her overnight bag, and even all over her hair. Jamie eventually ran to the bathroom, locked the door, and took a shower. When Jamie came out of the bathroom, Ashley and the other girls grabbed her, tied her to a chair, and began screaming at her. Ashley yelled vicious insults at Jamie for nearly an hour. When words weren't enough, Ashley decided to cut Jamie's hair. She asked me to hand her a pair of scissors, and I did. I still don't know why I went along with it. I hated seeing Jamie being tortured like that, but I didn't have the courage to stand up to Ashley or leave. Ashley cut small pieces of Jamie's hair before hiding her sleeping bag and going to sleep. The next morning, Jamie got her bag back, and her mom picked her up. She didn't say a word about what had happened. I felt sick with guilt. I stopped talking to Alexis after that because I couldn't face the shame of what I'd been part of. I have no idea what happened to Jamie after that night, but I'd give anything to apologize to her. Watching someone be bullied and not standing up to it is almost as terrible as being the bully, and I've carried the weight of that night with me ever since. Story 31. When I was in high school, I worked at Target. Around Christmas time, I saw a woman, probably in her mid-20s, stuffing items from the baby aisle into her child's oversized snow jacket. Our eyes met when I turned the corner. She looked scared and ashamed, quickly picked up her child and walked away. I froze in the aisle, torn about whether I should report her. Part of me felt it was my job, but something about the situation moved me. It didn't feel like she was stealing for thrills or out of greed. It felt like she was desperate to provide for her child. In the end, I decided not to say anything. A month later, Target screwed over my department anyway. Corporate had promised that the store that sold the most GameCubes would receive 3 systems to reward their top sales associates. I worked my tail off, sure I had earned one. When the time came to hand them out, they announced the GameCubes had been donated to needy kids instead. I'm all for helping those in need, But telling a 17-year-old making $6.50 an hour during the busy holiday season that they had a chance to win something and then taking it away, that stung. Looking back, I don't regret not reporting the woman. That moment taught me a lot about compassion and the struggles people go through. Story 32. 2 years ago, I was on a tour down the east coast of Africa, passing through Tanzania on a large overland bus. We were traveling quickly through a small town when suddenly the bus came to an abrupt stop. On the other side of the bus, I heard screaming. At first, I thought we had hit an animal, but as people began crowding around the bus, crying and yelling, it became clear that we had hit a young boy on a bike. He died on impact. Our tour leader came around to explain what had happened and locked us in the bus. Apparently, they were trying to call for an ambulance or police, but the village had no phone lines. Meanwhile, the locals outside were growing increasingly angry. Some had started sharpening knives on the pavement right next to the bus, and more people were arriving from a neighboring village. Eventually, we drove to the nearest police station with a local as our guide. That's when I learned how deeply corruption runs in some places. Our driver paid the police to represent him, which essentially meant the incident was brushed under the rug. He gave a small compensation to the boy's family, avoided any inspection of the bus, and continued the tour as if nothing had happened. It's hard to describe how that moment made me feel. Angry, sad, and helpless all at once. A child lost his life, and justice felt like an afterthought. It's a memory that has stayed with me, a stark reminder of how complex and unfair life can be in some parts of the world. Story 33. When I was about 15, I was biking home late at night from a friend's house. My dad was an alcoholic and didn't care much about what time I came or went, so I was used to being out at odd hours. I was riding through a park when I heard crying mixed with laughter. Curious, I slowed down and decided to check it out. In the dark, I saw three guys holding someone down and laughing. At first, I wasn't sure what was going on. Maybe I was misinterpreting the situation. It could have been something harmless, like a prank or friends messing around. But I couldn't ignore the crying. I called out, "What the hell are you doing?" They looked up at me, startled. That's when I realized these three guys from my school were pinning a girl around our age to the ground and trying to tear her clothes off. One of them yelled at me to F off. Adrenaline kicked in. I grabbed a sturdy tree branch nearby and swung it at the guy who yelled at me, hitting him hard. He went down, and I followed up with a kick to make sure he stayed down. His two friends were ready for me now. One of them pulled out a knife and started waving it around. I wasn't scared, though. I'd grown up around my dad and his shady friends, and I'd seen how they operated. They always used a weapon immediately if they intended to. So when this guy just waved his knife, I figured he wasn't prepared to use it. Fueled by adrenaline and false confidence, I said the first thing that came to mind. "You sure?" It was a weird, confusing line, but it somehow gave me a momentary advantage. Then I felt a sharp blow to the back of my head. The pain was like nothing I'd felt before. I turned confused and saw the girl, the very one I was trying to help, holding the broken neck of a bottle, looking terrified. I still don't know why she hit me. That was all the opening the guys needed. They rushed at me, focusing on wrestling the stick away rather than stabbing or tackling me. I managed to land a few punches, but my head was bleeding badly from the broken bottle and my adrenaline was wearing off. Eventually, they got the stick and I realized I was outmatched. Everyone had a weapon except me, and I was losing strength. I decided to run. They didn't follow me, and I have no idea how the rest of the night played out for them. When I saw them at school a few days later, I braced myself for retaliation. But to my surprise, they acted like nothing had happened. They didn't even seem to hold a grudge. To this day, I wonder what became of that girl and why she reacted the way she did.